Before he died, Charlie Kirk spoke words that now feel like prophecy, words that still echo like thunder through the silence he left behind. A man who seemed unstoppable, larger than life, suddenly silenced by a single shot. How could someone with such fire, such courage, such an unshakable faith in Christ be torn from this world in an instant? Was it only hatred that ended his life? Or was there a darker truth hidden in the shadows all along? Think about it. Why do the greatest voices always seem to fall when their influence burns the brightest? Why do men who speak with conviction, who refuse to bow, meet such violent ends? And what if the answer is not just politics or ideology, but a war between light and darkness itself? In this video, you are going to uncover the story no one dares to tell, the childhood that shaped him, the rise that made him a legend, the conflicts that nearly broke him, and the martyrdom that sealed his legacy forever. You will see how his words, "Politics is peanuts compared to Jesus," were not just a slogan but the heartbeat of his entire life. So let me ask you, do you believe his assassination was just an accident of hate, or part of a greater battle for the soul of a nation? Comment your thoughts below. I want to know where you stand. And if this truth stirs something in you, if it awakens a deeper hunger for meaning, then stay with me. Because what you are about to hear will not only shock you, it may heal you. It may change the way you see faith, sacrifice, and the fight to make heaven crowded. Now, let's step into the final days of Charlie Kirk, and the untold truth that still burns like fire. Childhood formation. He was not born into comfort or crowned with fame at birth. Charlie Kirk was born into the ordinary, into the same fragile clay we all share. And yet, from the very beginning, there were whispers of something greater. Every soul carries a spark, but in him the spark grew into a flame that could not be hidden. As a boy, he did not grow up in palaces of power, but in a family where values mattered more than wealth, where the rhythm of faith, hard work, and conviction began to carve deep channels into his character. While other children chased after noise, Charlie was listening, watching, learning, absorbing the world with the wide eyes of someone who already knew that his life would not belong to himself. In his earliest struggles, you can already see the outlines of his destiny. School was not always easy. Rejection, doubt, and the constant undercurrent of being underestimated became his silent teachers. How many of us know that feeling, being overlooked, dismissed, told you are not enough? But here is the truth. It is often in those moments of invisibility that God does his greatest work. The child who is ignored by the world learns to hear the whisper of the divine. The young man who tastes failure learns the sweetness of resilience. Charlie's wounds became the soil where his resilience grew. He was just a teenager when the spark of his gift revealed itself, the voice, the presence, the fire of speaking truth when others stayed silent. Imagine a boy standing before a crowd for the first time, his hands trembling, his heart racing, but the words spilling out with a force that could not be stopped. That is when he discovered it. His tongue was not just muscle and sound, it was a sword forged for battle. He could move hearts, stir conviction, awaken courage. This was more than talent, it was calling. And at the center of this calling was Christ, not a distant God, not a ceremonial religion, but the living Jesus who burned within him. While others his age were chasing pleasure, he was chasing purpose. His Bible was not decoration, it was his map. His prayers were not rituals, they were lifelines. It was in his youth that he began to see politics not as the highest mountain, but as a hill beneath the cross. He once said, "Politics is peanuts compared to Jesus." And those words were not the polished slogan of a famous man. They were the beating heart of a teenager who had already chosen his true allegiance. Think of it. The world often tells us that childhood is for play and that destiny waits until later. But Charlie's story defies that lie. In the silence of his early years, conviction was planted. In the small battles of adolescence, courage was tested. And in the ordinary moments, family dinners, late-night talks, whispered prayers, the extraordinary was formed. Every scar and every lesson was shaping a leader who would one day stand before millions and declare the truth without fear. There is a lesson here for all of us. Do not despise the small beginnings. Do not curse the wounds of your past. Because in every tear, in every rejection, in every lonely night, there is a hidden training ground. God does not waste pain. He transforms it. Charlie's story reminds us that greatness does not begin on the stage, but in the quiet struggles where no one is watching. The boy who was once overlooked became the man who could not be ignored. Picture him now, walking with his family at dusk, already carrying the weight of dreams larger than himself. He loved them fiercely, and even then he knew family was second only to Jesus. His strength was not born in the spotlight, but in the warmth of those evenings, in the prayers spoken at night, in the love of a wife he had not yet met, but was already preparing to cherish. From the beginning, Charlie was never just building a career. He was building a life anchored in faith, a foundation that storms could not shake. This is why his story resonates so deeply. It is not just about politics, not just about influence, not just about being a conservative voice. It is about a young man whose childhood carved him into someone who believed that life is bigger than fear, bigger than hatred, bigger than death itself. And that is why his martyrdom struck the world like lightning. He had been preparing his whole life to give everything away, to stand unbroken in the face of darkness, because he had already surrendered long ago. So when we speak of Charlie's childhood, we are not just telling the story of a boy, we are tracing the fingerprints of God on a life. We are seeing how resilience is forged in the furnace of struggle, how conviction is born in the shadow of doubt, how faith becomes unshakable when tested early. And in seeing his beginnings, we understand more clearly his ending, because every step of his early journey was pointing toward the moment when he would stand, fearless, before a world that both loved him and hated him. Let us not miss the point. His youth teaches us that you and I are also being shaped in the ordinary, in the unseen. The battles you face now, the doubts you wrestle with, the pain you carry, these are not wasted. They are chiseling you into the person you were meant to be. That was Charlie's truth, and it can be yours too. As we move from the story of his childhood into the rise of his public life, remember this. The boy who once walked in quiet neighborhoods, dreaming of something more, became the young man who founded a movement that changed history. The foundation was laid in his earliest years, and now the climb to the summit begins. Rise to fame. He was barely 18, fresh out of high school, when most of his peers were wondering what college to choose or what job might pay the bills. But Charlie Kirk chose a different road, one that looked impossible, one that everyone told him he could not walk. With no degree, no family fortune, no polished connections, he stood up and declared that he would build a movement, not just a club, not just an organization, but something that would shake campuses across America. And that is how Turning Point USA was born, not in the halls of privilege, but in the daring heart of a teenager who refused to bow to fear. Imagine the scene: a young man walking into a room full of doubters, holding nothing but conviction in his hands. He had no credentials, but he had voice. He had no wealthy backers at the start, but he had vision. He had no army behind him, but he had courage. And when he spoke, people leaned in. When he challenged, people listened. His words cut through the fog of apathy and ignited sparks of belief in those who thought they were powerless. Step by step, speech by speech, handshake by handshake, he grew something that the world could not ignore. This rise was not glamorous. It was long nights on the road, cheap motels, endless airports, rejection, mockery, exhaustion. While others partied, he worked. While others settled, he sacrificed. He knew that the seeds of greatness are not planted in comfort, but in consistency. And little by little, his voice grew louder. The campus stages grew larger. The audiences multiplied. What began as a whisper in the heart of a teenager turned into a roar heard by millions. The world began to notice. Donors came, but not without conditions. "Leave Jesus out," they told him. "Stick to politics." And here is where his true rise was revealed. Not in accepting millions, but in walking away from it. "Give your money to someone else," he said. "Without Jesus, we are nothing." Who turns down power like that? Who risks everything for the sake of faith? Only someone who knows that politics is dust compared to eternity. And yet, even as his influence exploded, cracks began to show. The stress of constant travel, the weight of responsibility, the shadow of danger, these pressed on him daily. He once admitted to a close friend, "I know they want me dead." Think of the courage it takes to live each day knowing the crosshairs might already be aimed at you. Still, he kept going, not because he loved danger, but because he loved people. To him, every student mattered. Every question was sacred. Every debate was a chance to plant a seed of truth. What set him apart was not just his sharp mind or his bold voice, but his humility. He would send videos to mentors asking, "How did I do? What would you change?" He was 6'4", a towering presence. But when you complimented him, he'd shrug like a farm boy hearing praise for the first time. "That's my team," he would say. Greatness without humility collapses, but Charlie wore humility like armor. His brilliance was undeniable. He could rally thousands, build coalitions, and connect people who would never otherwise share the same room. Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson disagreed on Israel, yet Charlie held them together under one vision. He wasn't just a speaker, he was glue, a bridge, a builder of coalitions in a fractured world. That takes more than charisma, that takes wisdom far beyond his years. But even brilliance did not shield him from the darkness of the climb. The higher he rose, the stronger the opposition became, labeled a fascist, accused of hate, attacked relentlessly online. He carried insults like scars. And yet, look closely. Instead of lashing out, he leaned harder into love. He gave the microphone to his opponents, invited questions from those who despised him, and showed grace where others would show anger. That is not the mark of a tyrant. That is the mark of a man who knew the example of Christ. There is a lesson here. Success is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the real test. Fame reveals what comfort conceals. When the spotlight hits, some crumble, some compromise, some fall. Charlie's rise showed that influence without faith is hollow, but influence anchored in Jesus can endure storms. The world wanted him to separate the sacred from the political, but he refused. He lived out Romans 13, believing government exists to protect the innocent, not to restrain the gospel. That conviction made him both loved and hated, and it cost him dearly. Think of your own life for a moment. What are you building? Are you chasing applause, or are you chasing eternity? Are you willing to walk away from opportunities if they mean losing your soul? Charlie's rise is not just his story. It is a mirror for ours. It asks us to examine the foundations we are laying. Will they withstand fire? Will they carry us when the world shakes? And as his star climbed higher, the tension mounted. The crowds were bigger, the headlines louder, the enemies more determined. Yet his message stayed the same. Jesus first, politics after, family always. This constancy is why his martyrdom felt like the tearing of a nation's soul. He had risen so high, touched so many lives, that when he fell, the impact was felt everywhere. From the boy with a trembling voice to the man who could fill stadiums, the rise to fame was not about ego, it was about calling. And with every step upward, he drew closer to the inevitable confrontation with darkness. For what rises too quickly often draws fire. And Charlie knew, every day, every stage, every crowd, that the risk was real. But he kept going, because in his heart he had already counted the cost. And so the stage was set. The movement was thriving. The voice was louder than ever. The opposition more furious than before. His rise was not the end. It was the storm before the night. And as he stood at the height of influence, another chapter was waiting in the shadows. The conflict, the backlash, and the relentless weight of leadership that would test his soul. Dark side. Conflict. Fame is never free. With every cheer came a shadow. With every ovation came a whisper of danger. As Charlie Kirk climbed higher, the voices against him grew louder, sharper, more venomous. They labeled him a fascist, hurled slurs, painted him as the villain. Imagine standing before a crowd of thousands, pouring out your heart, only to be met the next day with headlines twisting your words, strangers cursing your name, entire movements devoted to tearing you down. That was his daily reality, and still he stood tall. But behind the stage lights and roaring crowds, the weight was unbearable. Leadership is not just about strategy, it is about carrying souls. Every young man and woman who wrote to him, every parent who begged him to speak for their children, every critic waiting for him to fail, it all pressed upon his shoulders. He balanced family, faith, and public expectation. And often those three forces collided like storms. His daughter would wake in the night, needing her father's comfort, while at the same moment an email would flash across his screen, threatening his life. How do you choose? How do you hold both in trembling hands without breaking? Charlie once confided, "I know they want me dead." Those words were not melodrama. They were the raw admission of a man who lived each day with a target on his back. Every walk required bodyguards. Every stage was a risk. Every moment of quiet was stalked by the possibility of sudden violence. He loved to take long walks in the evening, talking about marriage, about the resurrection, about faith, but always with a shadow following a few steps behind, a man with a gun assigned to keep him alive. Safety was never promised, yet he chose to live boldly anyway. The opposition did not only come from outside. Sometimes it came in the form of temptation. Donors waved fortunes in his face, urging him to silence Jesus and speak only of politics. He could have taken the easy path, wealth, comfort, applause, but he refused. Like Joseph before Pharaoh, like Daniel in Babylon, he would not bow. To him, money without truth was poverty, and influence without faith was corruption. This integrity cost him millions, but it gave him freedom, and freedom rooted in Christ is worth more than gold. The conflict was not only financial, it was emotional, spiritual, relational. Friends betrayed him, enemies mocked him, colleagues sometimes questioned his choices. The media distorted his message, painting light as darkness and darkness as light. And perhaps the cruelest cut of all came from those who celebrated his death when it finally arrived, chanting online as if his life had been nothing. But even before that day, he carried this reality in his heart. Love does not mean approval. Grace requires truth. And because he dared to speak the truth, he was hated. There is a deep lesson in his struggle. To lead is to bleed. To stand for something eternal in a world obsessed with the temporary is to invite ridicule, rejection, and risk. Many want influence. Few want the cross that comes with it. Charlie bore his cross every single day, and though he staggered under its weight, he never put it down. Think about your own life. Have you ever been misunderstood, rejected, or accused unfairly? Then you know a glimpse of his burden. The choice is always the same. Compromise for acceptance or stand firm for truth. Charlie chose to stand. And his stand reveals something healing for us. Even in the storm, even in the hate, even in the fear, courage can be stronger than despair. His conflicts remind us that greatness is not polished, it is scarred. The light we saw on stage was born in the shadows, hammered by fire. And that is why his story matters, because it is not just about his battles, but about ours. If you feel weary under criticism, if you feel crushed by expectation, his life whispers to you, keep going. Do not let the voices of hatred drown out the call of heaven. This dark chapter of opposition and conflict was not the end. It was the tightening of the noose before the final blow, the gathering storm before the lightning strike. Every insult, every threat, every sleepless night was preparing the stage for the climax, the moment when courage and sacrifice would collide in fire. His conflicts were not signs of weakness. They were proof that he was walking the narrow path, the dangerous road where light confronts darkness. And so the tension grew. His influence was unshakable, his enemies relentless. The burden heavier, the nights longer, the danger closer, all of it leading to that one tragic day at Utah Valley University, when the whispers of threat became the roar of gunfire, and the story of Charlie Kirk would shift forever from conflict to martyrdom. Climax Martyrdom. It was a September day at Utah Valley University, a place where students gathered not just to hear a lecture, but to witness a man who carried fire in his voice and conviction in his heart. The crowd was alive, chanting, waving hats, shouting USA with a passion that electrified the air. Cameras rolled, faces lit with hope, and Charlie sat on stage, ready to do what he always did, speak truth, challenge minds, and call young people to a higher purpose. No one knew those would be his final moments on earth. The sound came suddenly, one sharp crack that shattered the atmosphere, a gunshot that tore through the air like thunder splitting the sky. For a split second, time froze. Students screamed, security rushed, chaos erupted. And there was Charlie, struck down in the very place he had come to pour out his soul. Witnesses saw his tall frame fall back, his eyes opening not toward the crowd but beyond it, fixed on something no bullet could steal. His friends later said his gaze was already past this world, already reaching for Christ. In the scramble that followed, his bodyguards lifted him, rushing through panicked faces toward the SUV waiting outside. Tires screeched, doors slammed, voices shouted prayers and commands. Inside that car, men pressed on his wounds, crying out, "Come on, Charlie, stay with us!" CPR was attempted, words of scripture spoken, desperate hands trying to hold back the tide of death. But those closest to him would later testify, Charlie did not suffer. He did not linger in torment. The shot was catastrophic, and in an instant his spirit was absent from the body and present with the Lord. Can you feel the weight of that moment? One man, 31 years old, carrying the burdens of millions, silenced in a heartbeat. And yet, in that silence, something eternal spoke louder than any human voice. His life ended in blood, but his faith ended in victory. Like Stephen in Acts 7, he fell with his eyes toward heaven. Like Paul, he had fought the good fight, finished the race, kept the faith. His martyrdom was not a defeat, it was a doorway. News spread like wildfire. Across the nation, hearts broke, tears fell, voices cracked with disbelief. Millions mourned, while at the same time conspiracy theories twisted across the internet. Was this political? Was it spiritual? Was it inevitable in a world where light always draws the hatred of darkness? The questions still hang heavy. Comment sections filled with both grief and anger, debates rising like storms. Some mocked, some celebrated, but many more wept. And in that weeping, a strange unity began to form, because even those who disagreed with him could not deny his courage. And what about his last words, his last wishes? He had always said, "I want to be remembered for my faith." And in his martyrdom, that wish was sealed forever. People recalled his bold declaration, "Politics is peanuts compared to Jesus." Now those words felt like prophecy etched into eternity, a reminder that his mission was never about winning arguments. It was about winning souls. There is a lesson here for every listener. Life is fragile, fleeting like vapor. We make plans, but eternity waits just beyond the thin veil of breath. Charlie lived as though every day mattered, as though every conversation could be the last chance to point someone to Christ. His sudden death presses the same question into our hearts. If today were your last, what would remain? Would you be remembered for possessions, for opinions, for empty pursuits? Or would you, like him, be remembered for faith? The martyrdom of Charlie Kirk cannot be measured only in loss, because loss was only half the story. The other half was gain, gain for eternity, gain for every soul who watched and wondered why a young man would risk everything for truth. His death became a sermon louder than his life, that love is stronger than hate, that faith is stronger than fear, that the blood of martyrs is the seed of revival. History has shown this over and over, from the first disciples to our own day. The enemy thinks death silences, but it multiplies. Picture his wife, Erica, arriving in tears, yet speaking with a strength that shocked the world. Picture his friends, still in shock, vowing to carry his mission forward. Picture tens of thousands gathering in Phoenix for his memorial, a stadium filled with grief and yet also with fire. That is the ripple of a life poured out. That is the echo of martyrdom. It doesn't end a story, it amplifies it. And maybe this is the hardest truth to embrace. Charlie knew the risk. He knew hatred followed him. He knew his name stirred rage. He knew his life was in danger. And yet he never pulled back. Why? Because he believed that the gospel was worth dying for. He believed that making heaven crowded was worth every threat, every sleepless night, every shadow that followed him. So let the weight of this moment rest on you. His story is not just about him, it is about us. Will we live half-hearted lives, or will we burn like he did? Will we cling to safety, or will we risk everything for something eternal? Will we curse the darkness, or will we shine until the darkness trembles? That day at Utah Valley University was not just the end of a man, it was the revelation of a truth, that death has no victory over a soul anchored in Christ. Charlie Kirk's martyrdom calls us to examine our own lives, to step out of fear and into courage, to choose faith over compromise, love over hatred, and eternity over comfort. And as the nation wept, as his enemies mocked, as his family held each other in grief, one reality remained unshakable. Charlie was gone from this earth, but his voice, his mission, his fire, those live on. What was meant for evil will be turned for good. What the assassin thought would silence will only thunder louder, and what began as tragedy will one day be remembered as triumph. From here, the story does not fade into silence. It rises into legacy. For even in death, Charlie's life preaches one final, unshakable truth. Jesus is worth it all. And that truth now carries us into the reflection of his legacy, where the impact of his faith will continue to shape generations. His story does not end with the sound of a gunshot, nor with the grief that followed in stadiums and sanctuaries across the nation. His story lives in every life he touched, in every student who asked a hard question and walked away with new hope, in every parent who saw in him a defender of faith and family, in every believer who realized that courage in Christ is not optional, it is essential. Charlie Kirk's legacy is more than politics, more than speeches, more than headlines. It is the echo of a man who believed with every breath that Jesus was worth it all. And when he fell, it was not silence that followed, but a chorus, millions of voices rising in grief and resolve, declaring that his mission would not die with him. Imagine the ripple of one life poured out. A young man with no degree, no great wealth, no inherited power, standing on campuses, armed only with his voice, his conviction, and his Bible, and from that a movement was born. From a single seed came a forest of influence. From one spark came a blaze that reached the farthest corners of culture. And even in death, that blaze has not dimmed, it has only spread wider. That is the paradox of martyrdom. What the enemy intends for destruction, God multiplies for victory. His life was a sermon, and his death was an altar call. To watch his journey is to be confronted with questions too sharp to ignore. What are you living for? What truth are you willing to risk everything for? In a world that rewards compromise, would you dare to stand? These are not abstract questions. They are mirrors held before our hearts. Because if a 31-year-old man could give it all for his faith, what excuse do we have for holding back? The beauty of his legacy is not only in the courage he displayed, but in the humility that carried him. He was brilliant, but he listened. He was powerful, but he bowed. He was influential, but he always pointed higher. This combination is rare in our world, a world drunk on ego and noise, and maybe that is why he stood out like a lighthouse on a dark shore, because humility shines brighter than pride, because faith outlasts fame, because love outlives hatred. His final wish was simple. I want to be remembered for my faith. And so he is. Not for the controversies, not for the labels, not for the endless arguments that swirled around him, but for his unshakable devotion to Christ. That is the treasure no bullet can steal, the crown no critic can tarnish, the testimony that will outlive every false word spoken against him. He is remembered as a servant who kept his eyes fixed beyond this world, and in that he calls us to do the same. But do not mistake his story as one to admire from a distance. His life demands a response. Will you let his example ignite something in you, or will you let it pass as another sad tale in a noisy world? If his courage speaks to your heart, if his faith resonates with your soul, then take that fire and carry it forward. Comment your thoughts, even your doubts, because conversation is where transformation begins. And if you feel the weight of his story stirring questions in you about truth, about eternity, about your own purpose, let those questions lead you deeper, not into despair, but into discovery. This is not just about remembering a man, it is about awakening a generation called not to comfort, but to conviction, not to silence, but to truth, not to fear, but to faith. Charlie's martyrdom is not the end of a chapter. It is the spark of a movement that is still unfolding, and you are part of it. Your voice matters. Your stand matters. Your decision to live for something greater than yourself matters. This is how we honor him, not by mourning without hope, but by rising with the same courage he carried. And if this video has touched something deep in you, if it has brought light into a dark place, or reminded you that you are not alone in your struggles, then I invite you to walk with me further. Like this video if you felt the fire of his story. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing these truths that cut through the noise, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that faith is stronger than fear. And if you feel moved to support, not with grand gestures, but with even the smallest act of encouragement, know that every ounce of energy you give helps keep this mission alive. If this message gave you strength on a weary day, or light in a shadowed night, then your support, whatever form it takes, is priceless. Thank you truly, from the bottom of my heart. His death left a hole, but his legacy leaves a map. It points us toward a life of integrity, a life anchored in eternity, a life where every breath can be used to make heaven crowded. That is not just his mission. It can be ours. And when history looks back, may it be said that we did not let his voice fall silent, that we picked up the torch he left behind and carried it higher, brighter, farther. So let his story not just move you, let it transform you. Let it call you into courage. Let it remind you that even in the darkest moments, love never fails, faith never dies, and truth will always prevail. Charlie Kirk's life was a light, his death was a seed, and his legacy is a call. The question is not whether his mission continues, The question is, will you carry it?